Hi everyone, so this is the second video of the low unemployment mini-series. Remember, low unemployment is the first government macroeconomic objective that I'm going to explore. So in this video, I'm going to describe, using examples, the different types of unemployment, and I'm going to distinguish between them. I'm going to use a diagram to explain cyclical unemployment and also use a diagram to explain structural unemployment. Then I'm going to evaluate government policies to deal with the different types of unemployment. Remember, evaluating means looking at the strengths and the weaknesses, the pros and cons. So let's get started. So, as I said, I promised I'm going to talk about and explain and distinguish between the different types of unemployment. There are four main types of unemployment. There's frictional unemployment, seasonal unemployment, structural unemployment, and cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is sometimes known as demand deficient. So let's find out the difference between them and how can the government deal with each of these types. The first one, frictional unemployment. So frictional unemployment is the first type I'm going to talk about. This is considered short-term or temporary. It is unemployment that is caused by moving between jobs. Say, for example, people who quit jobs that are searching for other ones, or people who finish education and are trying to enter the workforce. Someone just graduated from high school or just graduated from college. Frictional unemployment is considered natural, and it's considered temporary. It's often not alarming for the government. Like, it's not that serious because it is by its nature very temporary. Now, possible policies to deal with unemployment. Well, the government could lower unemployment benefits because if people are getting really high unemployment benefits, that might put them off from accepting jobs that might pay a little bit lower than the unemployment benefits. Another thing is to improve the flow of information between potential employers that are looking for workers and people who are looking for jobs. So try and create, job bulletin boards, job websites, and so on. The government can try to take action to improve the flow of information. The second type of unemployment is seasonal unemployment. Some industries employ workers on a seasonal basis, like agriculture, farming, construction, tourism. Again, this is also considered natural, and it's not very alarming in any dynamic economy. Now, possible policies the government can take to deal with seasonal unemployment, again, encourage workers to take different jobs in their off-season. So try and create incentives and benefits for workers to take different jobs in their off-season. Lower unemployment benefits. Again, you want to encourage people to accept jobs even if they are low paying instead of just staying on welfare and receiving unemployment benefits. And the government could also, like frictional unemployment, try to improve the flow of information between possible employers and job seekers. The third type of unemployment is structural unemployment. Now, this is caused by changes in the structure. Remember, structural has to do with structure. Changes in the structure of the labor market or changes in the structure of the economy. So it could be caused by, say, for example, changes in the demand for particular labor skills. When new technologies evolve, for example, this is a good example, when new technologies evolve, suddenly some jobs just disappear. So when computers, desktop computers, and word processing software was introduced into the market, a lot of typists, people who worked on the old typewriters, lost their jobs. This is structural unemployment. It could also be caused by changes in the geographical location of industries, like businesses that relocate overseas from the United States to Mexico or relocate to cities where the labor is cheaper. So say, for example, a factory shuts down in New York and moves to, I don't know, someplace in Michigan because of cheaper labor. It could also be caused by labor market rigidities, things that are very rigid and not very flexible in the labor market. Things like the minimum wage. The minimum wage prevents the equilibrium wage from falling so that unemployment would disappear. Having very powerful trade unions, having too many laws that protect the workforce, also from the unwillingness of workers to accept lower wage rates if you have really high and generous unemployment benefits. So all of these are things that could lead. So changes in the demand for particular skills, changes in the geographical location of industries or labor market rigidities could lead to structural unemployment. So here's a diagram showing a fall in the demand for a particular type of worker. So say, for example, we're talking about manufacturing workers, and this is the wage for manufacturing workers. This is the supply of manufacturing workers by the workers themselves. So the workers are supplying, this is the amount of people willing to work as manufacturing workers. And over here is the original demand for manufacturing workers by employers, by factories that want manufacturing workers. Now, say, for example, there's a new technology and suddenly factories don't need that many workers. So there's a decrease in demand now for manufacturing workers. This decrease in demand would lead to a fall in the quantity of manufacturing workers employed from Q1 to Q2, and the fall in the wage rate from W1 to W2. So say, for example, due to the cost of labor in many developing countries, as well as increasing automation in developed countries, demand for manufacturing workers has decreased, and this is how you show it in a diagram. This is a very good example of structural unemployment, because there have been changes in the structure of the labor market due to increased automation or cheaper cost of labor elsewhere, and there's change in the structure of the economy. Now, there are two types of policies the government can use to deal with structural unemployment. There are interventionist policies, where the government actively interferes in the market. So one thing that the government can do is set up educational systems that train people to be more occupationally flexible. If people are trained to only do one thing that can easily be automated or replaced by technology, they're more likely to suffer from structural unemployment sometime during their career. So train people to be more flexible in their occupations, occupationally flexible, have a variety of skills. Maybe also improve occupational mobility by spending on adult retraining programs. The government could set up retraining centers so that the structurally unemployed can gain new skills and be able to match the jobs that are available. Because it's not that there are no jobs, it's just that they don't have the skills for those available jobs. The government could also give subsidies to firms that provide training for workers, encourage firms to train their workers on a variety of skills. The government could give subsidies or tax breaks, tax incentives to workers to encourage them to relocate to where the jobs are if they exist in particular areas of the country. So the government could give, interest-free loans or give grants to encourage workers to move into smaller cities that have, more jobs. This will improve the geographic mobility of the workforce. The government could also support apprenticeship programs for workers to acquire new skills. However, keep in mind we're evaluating policies, we're not just suggesting them. All these policies involve a high opportunity cost, because that's money being spent that could be spent elsewhere, and are usually only effective in the long run. And this is one of the biggest challenges with dealing with structural unemployment. These policies involve a very high cost and hence a high opportunity cost, because what is being given up? This is money that could be spent on primary schools or on healthcare, and also they are usually only effective in the long run. There are also market-based policies that the government can adopt to deal with structural unemployment. These are minor tweaks in the market that would eventually lead to structural unemployment being fixed by the market. So it's not interventionist. One way the government can do this is to reduce unemployment benefits. Remember, very similar to frictional and seasonal unemployment. This will encourage workers to accept available jobs even if the wages are lower. The government could increase labor market flexibility. You want to make the labor market less rigid, more flexible, so that through demand and supply, the unemployment would disappear by itself because the market would adjust itself by itself. This is through labor market deregulation, which is the opposite of regulation. If you have too many rules and laws in labor markets, maybe try and reduce these laws. So reducing restrictions for businesses to hire and fire workers. A lot of businesses don't hire workers if they feel like it's impossible to fire them. A lot of countries make it very difficult to fire a worker. Maybe remove minimum wage laws, okay, because these make it very difficult for businesses to cut wages, and hence they're more likely to fire people. Reduce the power of trade unions and increase the flexibility in the labor market. This will all encourage businesses to take on more workers. However, remember, we're evaluating. There is a cost involved with these. There is a disadvantage. All these labor market rules and laws are actually designed to protect workers. So by deregulating labor markets and working to improve labor market flexibility, you're essentially disempowering workers and you're empowering businesses, which can lead to the exploitation of workers and the worsening of working conditions. So you remember, you have to balance between being efficient and being equitable. So while it might be more efficient to deregulate the labor market and get rid of some of these laws and rules, that could encourage businesses to actually exploit workers further. And this can lead to growing inequity in the economy. So these are some of the weaknesses of these market-based policies. So I've already covered frictional, seasonal, and structural unemployment. Now, these three together are usually grouped together, and they are referred to as natural unemployment. These types of unemployment exist even when the labor market is in equilibrium. So they exist even when the economy is at full employment on the long run aggregate supply and producing its full employment level of output. Remember, when we did the aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram, we said that on the long run aggregate supply curve, the economy is at full employment. This is what we mean by full employment, that there's no cyclical unemployment. There's no cyclical unemployment, but frictional, seasonal, and structural still exist. They exist even when the economy is at full employment. They're called natural unemployment. This brings us to the last type of unemployment, which is cyclical, or another word for it, demand deficient. This is caused by a fall in the aggregate demand for goods and services in the economy, which leads to a fall in the aggregate demand for labor, ADL, as a result of firms cutting back on production. So essentially, there's not that much demand for goods and services, so firms don't really need to produce that much, hence they don't really need to hire that many workers, so they end up firing a lot of workers. This is cyclical or demand deficient. There's a deficiency in demand. This occurs usually when economic growth slows down or when the economy experiences recession. It occurs because businesses are more likely to fire workers in times of recession than cut their wages. This is, remember when we did Keynesian macroeconomics, we said that there's a downward inflexibility of wages due to minimum wage laws or due to the very strong power of trade unions or due to many laws protecting workers. So because of these labor market rigidities and rules, businesses are more likely to fire workers when there is a recession rather than cutting everyone's wages to sort of cut back on their costs. So that's one thing that contributes to creating cyclical or demand deficient unemployment. So as you can see here, this is the Keynesian aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram that we've seen earlier. This is the aggregate supply curve for the Keynesian macroeconomists, and because there's a decrease in aggregate demand for goods and services and there's a downward inflexibility, a lot of businesses just fire their workers, and this creates cyclical unemployment. So this is the aggregate supply of workers, and this is the aggregate demand for workers by the businesses. Now there's a decrease in demand, as you can see here, which leads to cyclical unemployment because wages won't fall. If this is the minimum wage, WE, the wage won't fall. So this will create cyclical unemployment, which is this distance here. And that's because of the downward inflexibility. The market is not being given the chance to adjust and get rid of this unemployment by itself. So, possible solutions to cyclical or demand deficient unemployment. The government could use fiscal policy to increase aggregate demand, which means lowering taxes and increasing government spending. Or the government could use monetary policy to increase aggregate demand, which means lowering the interest rates and increasing the money supply. Okay? Whether it's fiscal or monetary policy or a combination of both, the aim of the government is to increase aggregate demand for goods and services, to get people to go out there and buy goods and services, which increases aggregate demand and encourages firms to employ more workers and produce more. However, this increased spending, remember, increased spending always entails an opportunity cost and will worsen a government budget deficit. So if the government has a budget deficit, this will make it worse. It could lead to possible crowding out of private investors, because if the government borrows to finance a budget deficit, this will lead to a higher interest rate, which will discourage private investors from borrowing. So this is called crowding out. It's not a cool thing. there's usually a time lag between implementing the policies and then seeing the unemployment fall. It's not like you pass the law today and the unemployment disappears tomorrow. There's a time lag. It could be inflationary, because if the government spends too much, that it creates too much aggregate demand beyond the capacity of the economy, that could actually lead to inflation. So you're solving one problem but creating another problem. In practice, it's not always easy to identify the types of unemployment. Remember, this is an economics lesson. In economics, we can very easily identify the types of unemployment, but in real life, an unemployed person is an unemployed person. It's not always easy when you're the government to identify the types of unemployment in order to implement the appropriate policies. So we've looked at possible policies, we've looked at their advantages and disadvantages, and we've looked at the different types of unemployment. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.